If you look at the recent influx of PS1 inspired games, to be fair, we are spoiled for choice. We really are. There are so many games that are coming out to the forefront that you can't help but deny their influences. And while many genres are taking advantage of this classic style format from this era, one of the biggest genres in question that really is at the forefront of this revival would be survival horror. Because make no mistake, when we look back, the PS1 era is pretty much the home of survival horror. And it's easy to see why you're seeing so many different games and takes, even modern visions of classic games being added to modern marketplaces that all take their influences off the classics, with Resident Evil, Parasite Eve, Overblood, to name but a few. But there's a reason for that. It's because they left such an impact on us as gamers, even players at a younger age back then, going back pretty much 30 years now at this point. If anything, we still yearn for that feeling of nostalgia, but yet also looking for something new at the same time. And these modern interpretations of classic survival horror are presenting that. Now, a lot of them are a mixed bag. In fairness, there are some questionable titles that are out there. They all have their own caveats and gripes and glitches and so forth, but the one thing you can't deny is the sheer love and passion that has gone into some of these titles, because they are trying to replicate things that have come before it, and for good reason, because there is a demand there, which I think is very cool. As a gamer growing up myself, with the PlayStation being my favourite console of all time, and even spending time in college, even studying video game design for a period, the truth is, if I was ever to go back and try to develop games and try to get good at it, you could say, if there was any one style that I would want to replicate, it would be from that classic PS1 era. It is my favourite background of games, my favourite graphical style, just the whole visual elements and just the atmosphere and tension and everything that it presents, with the low poly blockiness of all of the visuals on display. It is my favourite time in gaming, and I love the fact is that games like this are starting to come back and even being developed in this style. And that's what's really cool about games development in the modern age, is that we have so many tools and resources available. We are no longer bound by the limitations of the original hardware, but yet those original limitations are what open the door to some of the best creative outlets we've ever seen. And when we look at these modern games that are starting to come out, you can clearly see that they're looking at these frameworks of what was there, and they're using those constraints as a means to craft something that is unique and obscure and out there, very like that seen on the PlayStation 1, which I think is really, really cool. Like, all you have to do is look at places like itch.io, and especially on Steam, where we are now getting playable demos or previews of many of these upcoming titles. All you have to do is look at some of the ones that I've even covered here previously on the channel, with the likes of Phase Zero and Jungle Rot, to name but a few. And there are other ones like Heartworm that recently released that actually got really good reviews, and it is a very unique and interesting game. Definitely worth a try, because it takes everything from the classic survival horror elements, but just adds so much more. And the same can be said even with this particular demo that we're looking at here of Aether Singularity, that complements those classic styles. Well, yes, on the face of it takes a lot from Resident Evil, but it really takes most of its inspiration from Parasite Eve, especially more so the first game, with all of its intricate elements, combat, aesthetics, special moves, magical kind of like abilities and so forth. You can definitely see the massive inspiration it has here. The fact is that it uses the low poly blockiness of the characters, environments, and even just the restrictiveness of the tank controls to aim and shoot, even almost restricting your movement in some shape or form when you're aiming and shooting, that you have to stand still. Now, you can still dodge, but you have to use different button combinations in order to dodge incoming attacks, but you are still limited by the controls, which only adds to the overall tension of the experience, because let's just put it this way, if you've played any of those earlier games, you can understand how difficult they can be, and this here is no exception. So when we look at this demo in particular, you're given access to a few different scenarios that will appear in the original game or later on when it is fully released. Now, it's still a demo after all. There are glitches that are apparent, and you'll notice that with some of the combat elements, but I think mainly it's by design, just to add that extra level of tension and just panic, if you will. But what's really cool is that it has a lot of similar aesthetics to the original Parasite Eve, even with regards to the character interactions, the dialogue, even with the combat scenarios, as when a combat fight does appear, very like a typical RPG, that it can be random at times, that the whole area is pretty much cordoned off and you're restricted to that area that you're in, and you can't move outside of it, so you have to complete the battle in order to continue, and obviously you have to make sure that you don't die in the meantime. So you'll have at your disposal weapons that you can use, but you do have some magical capabilities with various attacks and even healing abilities that can help you in order to win the fights overall. In saying that, however, with this demo, your magical abilities are limited, that once you've used them once or twice in a scenario, they're pretty much done for, and you have to replenish your magic power in order to use them again at a later stage. And in later elements elements, especially with the boss fights, which you will have a few of them here in the demo. They can be quite tricky, as each boss has their own distinctive attack patterns, even additional attacks, but they can wipe out your health almost instantly if you're not careful, so you always have to be mindful of your surroundings, and it is quite difficult to do considering some of the scenarios that you're in, that the environments or the rooms that you're in are so small and cumbersome and clunky and almost claustrophobic that you just have to really just have your wits about you. And believe it or not, when I was playing it did take quite a few tries. Sometimes even the game did crash because it just wouldn't work the way that you intended it to work, but again, it's a demo, it's going to happen. But it's very cool. It's just, I love the aesthetic of it. It uses 3D graphics, but they'll kind of try to do it in more like a pre-rendered style, but everything is 3D. But the fixed cameras and just everything that goes about it, it really makes good use of the dark light effects. Just even lighting up certain areas within a room that you can't see it straight away until you get close to it. And because of the visuals and the textures, even trying to use some of the warped elements that you would often see in PS1 graphics, what it does is it opens up your mind and allows your imagination to kind of go crazy with thinking of things that could possibly happen. It fills in the gaps, if you will. That's what was great about these older games, even if you look at the likes of Silent Hill, for example. Because of the weirdness of the textures and the fog and all of the in-between elements, it just left your mind going crazy as to what is happening next. What if, you could say, which was a cool concept back then, and it's still a cool concept now. And the fact that these developers aren't limited by the technology anymore, it just allows them to be a bit more creative. But like I said, they're still using those limitations to kind of work within those boundaries to create something truly unique. While yes, when you look at it on the outside, is it anything different from the older games? Not so much, but they are able to add their own spin on it, which this game does down to a T, which even takes on the role of the story, which leading to the birth of, you could say, the internet, which does take examples from real world scenarios. But in this context, the internet, or what's called the Ethernet, or the Aethernet, or how you pronounce it, essentially it was developed as part of a military kind of like experiment way back in the early years, like in the 60s, which is relevant to what history pertains itself even in the modern day in the real world. But the difference between this and the game is that the internet is a source of information and pretty much has changed how the world operates. The same can be said here with the story of this game. While it is a use for information and to communicate with other people, it has also become a digital portal or a gateway for the nether realm or the demon world to also show face, and they use it as a means to enter the real world and cause havoc among the living by haunting and even killing people as a result of just causing chaos, which leads to the characters you play as in this game being tasked as part of a special agency group where their only one goal is to eradicate and eliminate these threats and find the sources of these portals and shut them down once and for all, which will take you through many different conflicts and dialogues and just story narratives where you have to solve puzzles, engage in different and sometimes tricky and challenging combat scenarios in order to overcome these various threats. It's very interesting. Like, it takes a lot of gameplay elements from Parasite Eve but still manages to try something a wee bit different and a bit unique. Even when you do unlock or finish the levels in the demo itself, it will unlock an additional mode with the challenge mode, and what it does is it gives you a selection of 10 different challenge levels, and straight away when you go to play it, it's instantly like the Metal Gear Solid VR missions that would have been also on the PlayStation from Konami. The only difference is instead of having like makeshift kind of like enemies and so forth, you actually have demons that you fight. But if you look at the visual elements, it's literally just the Metal Gear VR mission. It's only just with ghosts or monsters, but at the same time you do have the tank controls to contend with, which you didn't have in the original Metal Gear Solid. And believe me, it's challenging because sometimes you get caught when you're trying to aim, and sometimes it just takes a while for the character to do what you want it to do, and that's where you can leave yourself open to attacks. So you have to time everything almost to perfection in order to have any chance of victory, because seriously it's just tough. And also because it's a demo, it will crash often at different times, so you just have to be mindful of that. But what's really cool is that when you do unlock the challenge mode, even after you quit the demo and you go back into it, it's still unlocked, so you can pretty much much carry on from where you left off. But I just think it's very, very cool. Even the narrative of the text and the story, it's very reflective of its era, of that time, but it has enough originality to make it unique to its own. The very fact is that it doesn't use voices like would have been seen in Parasite Eve, especially with the first game. It uses like dialogue or text boxes that'll appear, kind of tell the story between the characters and their interactions. It is very, very cool. It just leaves your imagination to kind of figure out the rest. But I would definitely recommend you play this if you're a fan of the classic survival horror style, even with the RPG elements that you would have seen in Parasite Eve. And especially if you're a fan of that series, this is definitely one to try out for sure. It's actually really, really cool. I just love the vibe that it gives off. And if anything, when it does release, I think it's going to be a popular game, if anything a hidden gem. Although it does feel a little bit simplistic with regards to the overall combat dynamics and the controls, because Parasite Eve would take a bit of getting used to. This here seems like a more watered down version of it in some regards. Now it will probably change when the game is released, but it's not to say that it's easy all the same. It's not. It's quite challenging and tricky, especially when you're using the dodge mechanics, because you have to remember which direction you're in and which buttons to press, because sometimes you can end up pressing the wrong button and you end up taking a couple of hits. So it is a tough one to figure out and just to master, but it's very, very cool. I just love the ambience and the atmosphere it gives off with the environments. Even just this demo alone proves of what's possible and what we could possibly see in the full game. So I would definitely give it a go. Again, there's a demo on Steam right now. Go and check it out. It's slated for release sometime this year, but I'd imagine it might be a wee bit later, maybe early 2026, hopefully. But this will be definitely one that I'll be looking into getting when it does release. I think it's very, very cool. Plus, I just love the old school Parasite Eve games anyway, and anything survival horror related from this era, or even reflecting it, which this does. So yeah, very, very cool. And like I said, if I was to try and go back and develop games, which I would love to really do at some stage in the future, I'd just have to learn all the tools all over again, but I would definitely develop games in this style. That'd be my number one thing. With that being said, however, I would love to know your thoughts of Aether Singularity. Are you a fan of it? Have you played it yourself? And do you like the references to Parasite Eve on the original PlayStation? Because they definitely are apparent here. So be sure to share it down in the comments below. And if you would like to see more content of more PS1 inspired horror games that are showing up in the modern day, make sure to keep watching, as I will be covering more in future videos. And if you would like to see more videos of more of these modern takes that I have covered previously of survival horror classics, you can check out this playlist right here. And as always, keep those gaming memories alive.